One of the unique things about me and Elle is that we got married to each other not once, but twice. It's not that the first one didn't take or anything like that. Our first wedding ceremony was held in the lobby of a lovely hotel in Santa Fe, New Mexico, one of our favorite places in the world. It was a private thing. It was just the two of us, a witness who happened to be the hotel concierge, a photographer we found who showed up thinking it was a practical joke because it was on April Fool's Day, and an officiant we found online who could best be described as esoteric. And some people who are watching today, friends of ours, you know who you are, sent us a nice bouquet and some champagne. It was lovely, but we'd arranged it on rather short notice and had originally discussed holding a much larger wedding later that same year, around Thanksgiving, when our family and friends could attend. Most of our family and many friends live in and around Austin, Texas, so we decided to go ahead and get married there as well. And even though we really didn't need to, we got a second marriage license in Texas to go along with our license from New Mexico. Now, having two marriage licenses from different states probably skirts what is strictly legal, but we honestly don't care. We've even talked about getting married right here in Pennsylvania, and New Jersey's right across the river. You know, there are all kinds of options around here because, once you start rolling, it's kind of hard to limit this thing to just two states. How can you place any limits on love? But the thing I did not fully appreciate at the time is that we have two wedding anniversaries every year, one in the spring and one in the fall, kind of like the equinoxes. They just come, and both must be celebrated equally and earnestly. So I really don't know if I can afford any more anniversaries. Anyway, wedding number 2. That was held in a small Methodist church in this tiny town outside of Austin. This town, called Winchester, is barely a dot on the map, a farming community. And the Methodist church is this classic wood-framed whitewashed building, just really cool and lovely. That's the largest structure for miles around. The funny thing about that church is it's always open. The doors don't even have locks. So we tracked down the church member who is the main caretaker of the place and asked about reserving it and how much it would be to rent it for our wedding. And she said, "Oh, you're welcome to just come in and do it. If you want to leave a donation in an offering plate, I guess that'd be nice. Just make sure you sweep up and turn out the lights before you leave." And that's what we did. So I will never forget that little church for 2 reasons. It's obviously very special to us because we were married there, but it's also special for simply being open. No locks, no barriers, just come on in anytime. A lot of churches used to be that way, open 24/7. If someone wanted to go in during the week and sit in a pew and meditate or pray. I served a church like that many years ago, and it was really nice. Sometimes I would be in another part of the building on a weekday, and I could hear jazz being played on the piano in the sanctuary by this guy who wandered in every week. But time marches on, and it's become necessary in most places to keep church doors locked for security reasons. Someone might make off with a brass candlestick, I guess. Although the truth is, whether those doors are physically locked or not, churches have had a way of excluding people for a long time based on what you're supposed to believe in order to belong there, or based on how wealthy you are, or on the color of your skin, or where you came from, or your sexual orientation. And the sad irony of that is nowhere more obvious than in the story we heard this morning from the book of Acts, the Acts of the Apostles, as it's officially known. It's an appropriate title for that book because the early followers of Jesus, right after his death, had this habit of keeping to themselves a lot. Not a lot of acts were happening. And it's understandable. They'd been close known associates of this man who'd been condemned as a dangerous heretic and blasphemer by the religious authorities, a man who'd been tortured and executed by the Romans. And, they were just not known for their patience with people who disrupted the social order, nor their friends. So the earliest Christians, long before they were even known as Christians, they needed to stay in hiding on the down low. Now, according to Luke, who not only wrote a gospel bearing his name, but also the book of Acts, that's a fun fact, they'd also been instructed by Jesus after his resurrection to stay in the city of Jerusalem for a while until something big would happen. He wouldn't say when, but they would receive the gift of the Holy Spirit, which would empower them to go out and spread the news about him to the far ends of the earth. But meanwhile, his followers had a lot of time on their hands with not a lot to do. So they stayed in hiding and decided to at least get organized by electing officers. Really. It's funny how people do that when they get into groups. Who's going to be the secretary and take notes? Don't we need to pass some bylaws here? Should we hold a bake sale? That kind of thing. Well, after well over a month of doing that and being cooped up together, the day called Shabbat rolled around on the Jewish calendar. Shavuot's the annual celebration of the first harvest and is also commemorated as the day that Moses came down from Mount Sinai with the 10 Commandments. Shavuot happens exactly 50 days after Passover. So it was also called Pentecost because Greek was the universal language that most people spoke back then. And in Greek, Pentecost means 50. Now you know. Just like any big religious holiday, Jerusalem was packed to the gills with Jewish people from all over the place, especially folks who had traveled from other countries. That's just what people did in those days. Instead of going on vacation somewhere, when they had a week off, they'd make a religious pilgrimage. I mean, can you imagine telling your kids you're not going to Orlando this year? They're back to dusty old Jerusalem again? That would be one long, whiny road trip. Because there is no water slide in Jerusalem to look forward to. I've been there. But on that day of Pentecost, the story goes, the followers of Jesus experienced a very strange thing. A rushing wind swirled all around them, and flames began dancing above their heads. And when some of them opened their mouths to speak, they found themselves talking in foreign languages that they didn't even know, which must have been both wonderfully fun and terrifying all at once. Let's all run over to a French restaurant. I finally know how to order. But really, because you'd have to wonder if you're going to be stuck speaking Norwegian the rest of your life. It does make you think. And when I was a kid in Sunday school, those were the kinds of questions I asked. But bless my teachers for their patience. They were saints. They would be shocked to know that I'm a minister today. That kid? God help us all. As the disciples and their friends went out and started milling around as a group, they were filled with the Spirit, all excitedly chattering away in different languages. Well, people took notice, especially the folks that were visiting from out of the country who heard their own native tongues being spoken by a bunch of people from Galilee, of all things, because Galilee was not known at the time as a very cosmopolitan place. Just the opposite, in fact. I mean, not to be unkind, but if you were from Galilee, you were basically considered to be a hillbilly by everybody else. They were all very closely related, but they were great banjo players. But there they were, these hicks from the sticks, talking up a storm, like they'd all just graduated with these advanced language diplomas from Harvard. And Luke tells us that these visitors from all over the known world, including Parthians, Medes, Elamites, and Mesopotamians, were simply astonished at what they were hearing. And if that wasn't strange enough, what's truly odd is that a lot of the people Luke describes as being these astonished onlookers, were also, apparently, time travelers. Because the Parthian Empire had not existed for 250 years. The Medes hadn't been around for almost 600 years. Same for the Elamites. The Mesopotamians had gone extinct about 700 years before. What's going on in this story? How in the world were people from long dead empires and civilizations showing up in the first place, much less hearing their long spoken dead languages being spoken? It would be like me welcoming visitors at our church and saying, "And today we're proud to have the Smiths with us in worship. They've come all the way from 12th century England and got to see the Norman conquest firsthand." You can visit about it at the fellowship hour. So to be honest, it's a mystery, kind of. But it's really not that big of a mystery if you're willing to read this story not as an eyewitness newspaper report or not as a video that someone on the scene made with their iPhone. And that can be a problem for a lot of folks, because the way so many people have been conditioned to read the Bible is to treat it as a documentary. To see it as if the stories being told all literally happened exactly the way they appear on the page. We've been taught that if you don't read it that way, then none of the Bible is true. I grew up thinking that, and I really never questioned it. But then I discovered that plenty of what's in the Bible isn't even attempting to tell a literal story in the first place. What you and I don't always get from our modern vantage point is that in the case of something like what's being described here in the book of Acts, the earliest readers of it would have immediately picked up on the fact that Parthians, Medes, Elamites, and Mesopotamians were long-lost civilizations. Those readers would have understood right off the bat that Luke was expressing something in this story that refuses to be categorized by time in the way that we usually understand time. Now, of course, Luke also includes people from far-off places that were very much contemporary with the events that he's describing. So what's he trying to say here? That people from other lands and ancient history and people from all over the world in the present are included in what the Spirit of God's up to? In a word, yes. I know it sounds a bit wacky, but stay with me. The truth is, if Luke had had any personal knowledge of the future, to make his point stronger, he might have even included among those people in the crowd an English-speaking artist from Doylestown, or a Spanish-speaking banker from Argentina, or a Mandarin-speaking teacher from Shanghai. Because from the moment the Spirit of God began swirling around and flames began dancing that day, Luke is saying all the normal rules of space and time pretty much flew out the window. The Spirit that moved that day, after all, was the very same Spirit described as the breath of God that was present from the moment of creation, blowing in the wind. And something that's that radically creative is simply not bound by time or by place. Now, it's not that Luke is writing fiction here or science fiction. He's not making up a fairy tale. He's telling us about something that people he knew experienced and reported back to him. Something true, but that breaks the rules of what our expectations of what can be true. He's just using the best words he can find to open the door to a truth that goes so far beyond our limited understanding of how God works in the world. An odd paradox of anything in the Bible, especially a story like this one, is that it can take on the weight of our reverence for it and the accumulation of tradition, the fact that it's in the Bible, and it becomes sort of landlocked, tied down, and tamed to merely being a story about how those earliest Christians were filled with God's Spirit and then empowered to spread the good news. So we call the day of Pentecost the birthday of the church, and then we move on. Well, that miraculous thing happened once upon a time. But the paradox is found in what the story itself is saying about God's Spirit, that it cannot be contained by once upon a time, or by distance, or by what's written down on a page in the Bible. That spirit refuses to be limited by our reverence for those words, or locked into a room where we keep our traditions safely on a shelf. We have to learn about it somehow, but what we're learning is that we can never presume to limit what is possible. If visitors from long dead, faraway civilizations can show up to be embraced by God, then isn't that the same, just another way of saying, God's going to do what God's going to do? And who are we to ever presume to place limits on that? Who are we to ever lock our doors or to ever lock our hearts to anyone from anywhere? Is it ever our job, really, to place limits on who's included in God's embrace? Is having faith about who's in and who's out, who's right and who's wrong, who belongs and who does not? The whole point of the story of the day of Pentecost is that there are no limits to what God can do. There are no doors that should ever close on God's love. And we should be good with that, because that's the truth. Whether we're good with it or not, it's going to happen anyway. The thing is, you and I already know that it's true. We know that love has a way of moving through time and traveling great distances and opening all kinds of doors, because think about this. It never matters if someone we love has died. We still love them, don't we? It doesn't matter if we move far away from people we love. We still love them, right? So why should God's love for all of us and for everybody be any different? Does the love expressed when a child is born begin and end on that birthday? Does the love expressed during a memorial service come with an expiration label attached? How about at a wedding? How many times you get married? However many times. Does that love not extend beyond the space where the ceremony is taking place? Of course it does. The Pentecost story isn't wacky at all. It makes all kinds of sense. God's spirit of love knows no limits. That door is always open. So let's act accordingly.